แต่งทองขายนะครับโรคไฟพาดทีฟองไทยครับว่ามีนกรอบนกใบนะครับถุงเท้าสายนะ
I was looking for it everywhere, and then I realized it was in my other jacket the whole time.
I've always been fascinated by how different cultures interpret stories and how they evolve over time.
It's one of those things where you have to experience it to really understand the depth of it.
Yes, I can be ready by then.
In today's session, we'll explore new strategies for personal growth and achieving your goals.
It's a miracle that we even got here. We did what we had to do.
I know, but at what cost?
The morning at the farm began like countless others, with mist clinging to the edges of the fields and the air carrying the faint sweetness of damp earth. Diep bent low among rows of vegetables, her hands deftly gathering the crisp leaves of spinach, while Nhi danced a few steps away, humming a childish tune James had once taught her. The basket between them filled slowly with green, but Diep's thoughts wandered elsewhere. She glanced at her phone, the screen cold and stubbornly blank. James had not called again. She told herself he was busy, that he was carrying the weight of 1,000 burdens for them, yet the silence pressed against her ribs like an accusation. She remembered how often he used to speak, every small triumph at work, every trivial frustration, shared like pieces of a mosaic that proved she was part of his world. Now the gaps between his words had become wide canyons, and she feared that somewhere in those spaces, love had begun to thin. Nhi tugged at her sleeve, giggling as she held up a beetle she had caught. Diep forced a smile, her heart twisting at the thought of James teaching the girl how to find such little wonders in the grass. The child had memorized his games, his jokes, the way he would ruffle her hair and make her laugh until tears came. "Do you think Daddy will play with me tonight?" Nhi asked innocently, and Diep's throat tightened. She answered with a nod, though she had no certainty to give. Together they carried their harvest to the market, the road dusty beneath their worn shoes. At the stall, they arranged eggs and vegetables for sale, smiling at neighbors, exchanging greetings that felt normal, ordinary, safe. Yet behind every smile, Diep's mind ticked through the silence of her phone, the questions unasked, the distance she could not bridge. While she weighed produce for a customer, her gaze drifted to the sky, as if searching for James in the clouds. She remembered the last time they had spoken, how he had promised he was working on something vital, something that might secure their future. His voice had been steady, but beneath it she had heard exhaustion, the strain of a man who carried storms behind his eyes. "Don't worry about me," he had said. "Take care of Nhi. Keep the farm alive." She had wanted to tell him that she did worry, that love without worry was no love at all. But he had ended the call before she found the words. Now, as coins clinked in her hand, she wondered if he still saw her as his anchor, or if she had become just another weight he carried alone. Far away from the quiet farm, James sat in a dim office where the air smelled of stale coffee and tension. He stared at numbers on a screen that blurred into shapes, his mind not on profits, but on survival. His father had frozen every account, cut him off from the company he had managed with such devotion, stripping him of position and power in a single ruthless stroke. James did not argue. He had grown up knowing his father's will was a storm few could withstand, but the pain was sharp. Years of labor reduced to nothing, every achievement dismissed as borrowed glory from the empire his father had built. "You will stand on your own," his father had said coldly, and James had bowed his head, refusing to let the man see how deep the wound went. His mother had stepped in quietly, her love a fragile shield against his father's cruelty. She offered him 5 billion dong, her entire savings, her safety net for old age. James's eyes burned with gratitude and shame as he refused. "Keep 2, he said. "I'll take only 3. I need you safe if I fail." His mother wept softly, begging him to be strong, reminding him that Diep and Nhi needed him more than wealth or pride. He kissed her hands, whispered thanks, and left with the money folded into his account like a fragile promise. Yet even as he walked away, he knew it was not enough. The fabric company he dreamed of growing needed more capital, more trust, more allies willing to bet on a man stripped bare by his own father. When his phone buzzed, it was Hung, an old friend, loyal in ways few men dared to be. 500 million, Hung said, transferring the sum without ceremony. "Don't thank me, just rise again." James swallowed hard, his chest tight with gratitude that burned almost as painfully as the shame. He promised himself he would return the money tenfold, that he would not allow his friend to regret believing in him. But promises did not pay debts. He poured himself back into research, studying companies, markets, risks. Each file was another battlefield where he fought without rest, eyes bloodshot, shoulders stiff from hours bent under the weight of decisions. Failure would mean ruin not only for him, but for the family waiting in a farmhouse that he visited only in brief, stolen hours. At the market, Diep sold the last of her eggs, her smile fixed, though her heart felt hollow. Nhi tugged her hand, eager to return home and cook the simple meal they always shared. In the kitchen, the smell of rice filled the air, mingling with the smoke of wood and the crackle of oil. Diep stirred the pot slowly, her mind replaying the image of James laughing beside them, his sleeves rolled, his hands helping chop vegetables. That image was fading, replaced by nights of silence and the cold echo of unreturned calls. She sat at the table watching Nhi play and whispered to herself, "Does he still love me? Or has work stolen what little we had left?" The words vanished into steam, unanswered. Meanwhile, James walked into a cafe, his chest tight with anticipation. Across the table sat Ree, a man younger but sharper, once skeptical of James's ventures, now curious. 3 billion for 5%, James proposed, his voice steady though his palms sweated. Ree studied him, eyes narrowed, weighing more than numbers, measuring resilience, desperation, pride. At last, he leaned back and smiled. 3 billion for 7. I'll bring American clients, machinery, management. Take it or leave it. James hesitated only a heartbeat before extending his hand. Deal. Relief flooded him like water over parched earth. They agreed to sign tomorrow. For the first time in weeks, James dared to imagine victory. That night, he returned briefly to the farm, his clothes dusted with the fatigue of travel, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Diep met him at the gate, her heart leaping at the sight of him, even as it broke at the weariness carved into his face. Nhi ran to him, clutching his leg, babbling about games and school. He lifted her high, kissed her cheek, and promised he would cook dinner with them at 8:30. "Just wait for me," he said softly to Diep. "I have to finish this work, but tonight I will be here." She nodded, clinging to his promise as though it were life itself. He mentioned a gift he was preparing for her, something for the day the farm was complete, and another for Nhi to answer her questions about why he stayed away. Then, just as quickly as he had arrived, he left again, swallowed by the road. Diep stood in the doorway long after his taillight disappeared, her heart heavy with love and doubt. She wanted to believe his promises, wanted to believe that his distance was sacrifice, not neglect. But the silence of the house crept back in, filling the corners with questions. Nhi asked when he would return, and Diep answered with forced certainty, "Soon, baby. He will be here soon." She tucked her daughter into bed, kissed her forehead, and sat by the window, staring into the night. The meal she had prepared grew cold, untouched, the table set for a family that seemed more like a dream than reality. In the city, James pored over contracts with Ree, preparing for the signing. His heart raced, not from the numbers, but from the fear that while he built the future, the present was slipping through his hands. He whispered Diep's name, then Nhi's, promising that once this deal was sealed, once the company grew strong again, he would return to them fully. But promises were fragile things, easily broken by distance and silence. The clock ticked toward 8:30, then 9, then 10. He did not notice. He was chasing survival, even as love waited, wounded in a farmhouse kitchen. Back at the farm, Diep sat alone, the lamp flickering as if mocking her. She looked at the empty chair across the table, then at the clock. 8:30 had passed. 9 had passed. The silence stretched cruelly, and her chest ached with the fear that she was losing him, not to another woman, not to betrayal, but to the relentless pull of ambition and despair. She whispered his name, her voice breaking, and wondered if love alone was enough to hold him when the world itself seemed determined to tear him away. Outside, the wind carried the night across fields nearly ready for harvest. Diep pressed her forehead to the cool window pane, her breath clouding the glass. Behind her, Nhi stirred in her sleep, murmuring James's name. Diep closed her eyes, her heart a storm of love, longing, and dread. She remembered his words, "I can lose everything, but not you, not Nhi." She clung to them, fragile and desperate, even as the night asked its own cruel question. Would James truly keep that promise, or would the sacrifices he carried in silence cost him the very family he swore he could not lose? The morning after James had promised to return home for dinner but failed to appear came heavy with silence. Diep awoke to the sound of roosters calling across the damp fields, but instead of comfort, the sound only deepened the ache in her chest. She reached for her phone before her feet even touched the floor, scrolling through missed calls that weren't there, checking messages that remained unread. The emptiness of the screen was more cruel than any harsh word could be. She turned to look at Nhi, still sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, clutching the pillow James had given her. Diep brushed a hand across her daughter's hair, whispering softly, "Daddy will come today." But her own heart didn't believe the words. At that same hour, James sat in a cafe with Ree. The contract spread before them like the map of a war. The figures were precise, the clauses sharp, each line binding him tighter to promises he could not afford to break. Ree's tone was steady, his smile polished, but his eyes glittered with calculation. $3 billion for 7%, he reminded, tapping the page. I bring the customers from America, the expertise, the machines. You bring the vision. Together, we grow. James signed, his hand firm though his stomach twisted. The ink dried quickly, but the weight settled in slowly, pressing against his chest. He had secured hope, yet it came with chains. He wondered if Diep would understand that every absence, every broken promise, was a step toward building the life she and Nhi deserved. But deep inside, he feared she might see only the empty chair at their table. Back at the farm, Diep moved through her chores with mechanical precision. She and Nhi harvested vegetables, gathered eggs, and fed the animals, but her mind drifted constantly. Each crow of a rooster, each creak of the gate felt like a possible sign of James's return. Her neighbors noticed her tired eyes and whispered among themselves, some with sympathy, others with curiosity sharpened into gossip. She waits for him, one woman muttered at the market, but men who chase business forget the hands that wait at home. Diep forced a smile, selling her produce with polite words, but inside, her heart fractured a little more each time someone mentioned James's name. That evening, James returned briefly, dust clinging to his shoes and exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. He found Diep in the garden, her hands stained with soil, her eyes weary. "I'm here," he said softly, as though those words alone could heal the cracks. She looked up, relief and reproach colliding in her gaze. Nhi waited, she whispered. She cried when you didn't come. James knelt, touching her arm gently. I'm sorry. The deal. It had to be done. It's for us, for her. Please believe me. Diep nodded, but the nod was brittle, born of love but weighted by disappointment. She wanted to scream, to tell him love was more than promises of tomorrow. It was presence today. But she bit her tongue, afraid that anger would widen the distance already growing between them. Inside the house, Nhi ran to him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his leg. Daddy, you said you'd come for dinner, she accused with childlike honesty, her eyes bright with unshed tears. James lifted her, kissing her forehead. I know, my angel. I'm sorry. But look! He pulled a small box from his pocket, inside a necklace with a tiny silver heart. Nhi's face lit with wonder, her disappointment fading as quickly as it had appeared. Do you like it? James asked, and she nodded fiercely, clutching the heart as though it were magic. Diep watched silently, her chest tight. The gift soothed the child, but she knew no necklace could replace the time lost. Days blurred into one another, with James darting in and out of their lives like a shadow. He visited when he could, always with gifts, always with promises, but never for long. Each time he left, Diep felt her resolve weaken. She told herself he was fighting for them, yet she could not ignore the growing emptiness in their home. At night, she sat alone by the lamp, staring at the doorway, replaying his words. I can lose everything, but not you, not Nhi. Yet his absence spoke louder than those vows. She wondered if love could survive being carried like a secret burden, unseen and unshared. Meanwhile, James plunged deeper into his work. With Rhee's investment secured, opportunities multiplied, but so did risks. Meetings stretched late into the night, documents piled high, and every decision carried the weight of survival. He traveled endlessly from city to city, chasing suppliers, negotiating terms, balancing accounts that always seemed ready to collapse. He carried Diep and Nhi in his thoughts, whispering their names like a mantra, but guilt gnawed at him. Each day, he sacrificed presence for progress, believing it was the only way to protect them, yet fearing he was protecting them from a future that might never arrive. Diep noticed the changes in herself. She laughed less, her smiles grew thinner, and her hands trembled when she folded Nhi's clothes. She found herself staring at James's empty chair, imagining his voice filling the silence, then shaking herself back to reality. Nhi grew restless too, asking more questions about why her father stayed away, why he broke promises. Diep soothed her with gentle lies, but every lie carved deeper scars in her own heart. She longed to confront James, to demand he choose between his relentless fight and the family waiting for him. But each time she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, she swallowed her words, fearing that her anger would crush him when he was already carrying too much. One evening, as James prepared to leave again, Diep caught his arm. Do you still love me? She asked, her voice trembling. He froze, stunned by the question, then pulled her close. More than anything. Everything I do for you and Nhi. She searched his eyes, desperate for reassurance, but found only the flicker of guilt and fatigue. She nodded, though doubt still coiled in her chest. When he left that night, the silence he left behind felt heavier than ever, pressing down like a storm cloud waiting to break. In the city, James faced yet another betrayal. Rumors spread that Rhe might be using the investment to gain more control than promised, whispering to other partners, angling for influence beyond his 7%. James confronted him, anger sharp in his voice. Rhe smiled coolly, denying everything, but the seeds of mistrust had already taken root. James realized that in trying to save his future, he may have invited a new danger that could strip him of control entirely. He left the meeting shaken, knowing the fight was far from over. Back at the farm, Diep and Nhi worked on the nearly completed house. They planted flowers by the doorway, painted the wooden fence, and dreamed aloud about the day they would finally live there. Nhi asked if Daddy would stay with them when the house was done. Diep hesitated, then forced a smile. "Yes, baby," he promised. But as she said it, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Promises were fragile things, easily broken by ambition and pride. She feared that even the new house, built with such care, might not be enough to hold their family together. James returned a few days later, weary but determined. He inspected the house, nodding at the progress, telling Diep it was 95% complete. "In 4 or 5 days, we can move in," he said, his eyes shining with hope. He spoke of a surprise gift for her, something he had been planning, something to prove his love. Diep smiled faintly, her heart aching with the memory of so many other promises. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to hope, but fear whispered that the gift might arrive too late. As night fell, James prepared to leave again for yet another meeting. He promised once more to return for dinner, to sit at the table with Diep and Nhi, to make up for lost time. Diep nodded, but when the door closed behind him, tears filled her eyes. She sat with Nhi, holding her close, whispering stories to keep the girl's faith alive. But in her own heart, the question grew louder, echoing in the silence of the night. Would James's endless sacrifices save their family or destroy it? And so part 2 closed with James driving into the darkness, his headlights cutting through the night like fragile hope, while Diep stood at the window, watching until the light disappeared. Between them stretched the distance of ambition and love, a gulf bridged only by fragile promises. In the stillness, the unspoken question lingered. How many more promises could their family survive before everything broke apart? The house stood finished, walls gleaming with new paint, windows waiting for light and laughter. Diep walked through the rooms with Nhi, the child's voice echoing, "When will Daddy stay here with us?" Diep smiled weakly, brushing dust from the sill. "Soon," she whispered, though her chest tightened with doubt. That night, James arrived, weary and hollow-eyed, carrying the weight of contracts, debts, and promises that had nearly crushed him. He looked at the home they had built and at the faces of the 2 people he could not bear to lose. "I've risked everything," he confessed, "but if I lose you, then none of it matters." Diep listened in silence, torn between anger and love. Nhi climbed into his lap, wrapping her arms around him as if her small embrace could hold him in place. James closed his eyes, clinging to the warmth of her touch, praying it would be enough to remind him where his true fight belonged. But outside, the world still pressed in. Partners with hidden motives, a father's shadow, debts unpaid. James knew the storm was not over. He might lose the company, he might lose his wealth, but as he held Diep and Nhi close, he swore to himself he would not let go of them. The story ended not with certainty, but with a question carried on the night air. Would James's sacrifices finally protect his family? Or would the very silence he kept drive Diep and Nhi away forever?